Hello everyone, I Ketan Paithankar welcome you to another episode of Neural Networking with Konverge AI. Today, we are pleased to have Mr. Atul Paralkar with us, Director of Business Intelligence at JRM Construction Management. With nearly 25 years of experience across strategy, operations, finance, and technology, Atul has helped organizations improve performance and cost control through data. His work in business intelligence, project controls, and technology driven transformation makes him a strong voice on how data and AI create impact. I'm excited to hear his perspective on where the construction industry is headed. Atul, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you so much, Atul, for joining us here on Friday morning of yours. So we'll start with the first question. So you have been a part of the construction industry, and the first question is about that. From a return on investment or value lens, how do you frame a strong problem statement for AI in construction before even thinking about solutions or tools? And why we have this question is because in an industry like construction, it is very sometimes difficult to look even for the correct use cases for artificial intelligence applications. So that's why we wanted to ask you this.
So first, Kaden, thank you and to Konverge for having me on board. I love to have these conversations, of course. Construction is so uniquely positioned in where it fits in the vertical for overall the built environment. But what is true and always has been true for at least the Americas is that construction is a very low margin business. And when that happens, as I often quote one of my own experiences when I had moved from AEC and I moved from engineering to construction, one of the first questions I asked my president was, how do we make money? And in hindsight, I should have asked, how do we lose money? Because while you make money in 4 or 5 ways, there are various ways to lose, right? Yeah. And so that the leakage in that plumbing is one of the core features of what construction is always susceptible to. What we try to do is we try to define what ROI means in this, right? So there is, of course, a cost of doing business, then there is a cost of getting business, and then there is some cost of execution. What we try to understand is what is the ROI on each of those pieces, and oftentimes you can then tackle perhaps only operational overhead, or you can tackle pieces like accounting and finance, or perhaps the acquisition cost in estimating, or something else to that effect. Each use case is its own challenge, and it's very peculiar, of course. But this ROI calculation, and if you want to call it calculation, goes hand in hand with the stakeholders that are in there and the problem that we're trying to solve. What is curious about AI, and I know everybody's been talking about this, is it has definitely pushed us back to the drawing board to ask some of the most fundamental questions in terms of what problem are we going to solve, right? I think that has been the best part about this whole journey, that we all get to reset the conversation. And that is what is happening in this session.
Right. So that's a good perspective to put, where you also mentioned in that answer the aspect of all kind of departments or areas where you need to think of, and the way you need to think of about going back to the drawing board and then say looking at it from a holistic perspective. But I guess what happens in construction is that there are certain specific use cases like cost control or planning which is involved, or earned value management, and you need some sort of guiding principles on deciding how AI can be a great value addition. So if you could throw some light on this, that for an organization in construction, how should they go about these aspects, and at the same time think about that problem statements and application of AI.
Now we're a couple of years in, right? Of course. And a lot of our colleagues and friends have experience in how they have developed through, right? And the first people, who break through the wall, they get hurt, but at least now they are paving the way. So they have shown us some examples. A good friend and colleague, industry colleague of mine, Adam Crow, on his Substack, he has these sort of 3 guidelines on how to approach your solutions, right? First is obviously, what problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to gain efficiency, or are you trying to create some new value or opportunity out of it? Right? So that is one way of looking at it. Second is, do you actually want to automate something completely, or you want to just enhance it, right? Enrich something. Like you want to, and the difference here is whether it's fully automated or is an activity human-led, and then you want to still just enrich the human-led experience, but keep it human-led. And I think the last is really more about approach and implementation. Is would you break the China, so to speak? Like, you want a big bang approach that I'm just going to establish everything, overhaul the whole setup, or do you want to land and expand? And this is the conversation about the revolutionary versus evolutionary change, right? In some functions, evolutionary is the only way to go because they may be more expansive, or they are mission critical and you don't want to disrupt a business in general, right? In other cases, it's perhaps a good time to question that and actually overhaul completely. Right? And so I think why we're trying to objectify, how to approach this and break it down into pieces and 3 points or 5-point lists, effectively, it still becomes a very nebulous consideration of all of these aspects. And obviously, it is case specific. It is also dependent on the maturity of the company in terms of their data journey, in terms of their process journey, which is actually comes even before data journey, but definitely goes hand in hand. And I would say it is topical to that particular company and the particular functions that you're dealing with.
Right. So I just want to pick that theme that you talked about, which I find very interesting, evolutionary versus revolutionary, which you mentioned. And I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. So one thing is people are observing that whenever you are applying AI to a business process, so there is some part of reimagining of the process that you have to do. And another thing which happens is that you have to take the stakeholders who are involved into confidence before taking the use case to production or exposing the users to it. So how do you tackle these from a construction domain point? Do you do some different things to it, or how do you approach that?
Buy-in is it's a persistent challenge, right? Regardless of whether it is tech adoption, it is process change, any transformation for that matter, right? I think just like any other sales process, right? You have to think about the motivational drivers for all of these stakeholders. And the good part, like as I said before, AI is forcing us to have this conversation to understand what is the basic problem you're trying to solve, right? Our first principles questions. And if you can onboard some of your partners and stakeholders on this journey to think, maybe we are not trying to just make the third step easy. Maybe we are trying to eliminate all the steps and completely change the workflow. Because your goal is not to improve steps. Your goal is the end goal.
Right.
And I think that kind of partnership is a very different conversation with these stakeholders. And so hopefully people with enough vision and sort of a understanding of where this might go in terms of potential, then you find the right kind of collegiate conversations with these individuals. We try to, of course, understand how much of human integration score is in some of these functions versus, say, fully automation scores. And our most immediate use cases are oftentimes where there's sort of a medium human integration score, but a lot of high potential to automate. Right? And I think those oftentimes become the best candidates functionally within the organization for us.
Right. So I can see that there is a marriage of human integration scores, which you talked about, and the technology and the business use case and the process aspect, which I'm sure that helps you to mitigate any kind of risks which you foresee beforehand. Of course, we cannot let go of all the risks, but then at least we have a good standing ground. So coming to the technology aspect, so you have led technology and operational excellence initiatives before as well. So when does a build versus buy decision make sense for AI systems in construction enterprises? And this is from a perspective that this year may be the year of vibe coding, right? And people are trying to make different softwares, and there is a debate that you can almost wipe code anything versus you buy from the market. So it's an interesting perspective considering the theme of this year, which I see as either wipe coding and the other theme being agentic AI.
Wipe coding is such a great example, Ketan. And mainly because only people who are, or when I say people, I mean entities and organizations, but only organizations that are big enough and mature enough to have these pieces as part of their work process, then understand and even leverage these things, right? So your level of maturity, whether it's by size or by complexity, that dictates how much you can cater to these aspects, right? So the question of buy versus build only applies to a certain scale and complexity of entity. Otherwise, there is a smaller or more nascent organization that is perhaps not thinking about build at all, right? So let's put those aside and let's look at whatever the rest of the mature organizations may be. And in those, I think a lot depends, of course, on is your tech stack firmed up? Is where you are along on your data journey. Are you still in advanced analytics, or have you actually tried to build some models around ML or AI, right? In terms of just basic algorithms, even if. And then tie that into the organizational setup for these companies. There are larger companies that have perhaps a very wide breadth of portfolios. And when I say construction industry, sometimes it's not just executing on a project or installing the built environment. Sometimes it is a subsidiary business of manufacturing or prefab, or there's a venture business on the side, or, that deals with startups and so on and so forth. And I think, so these entities are often care about how the sausage is made, right? And so then they would actually think about how do you leverage vibe coding, and then why am I onboarding another company to help me do this when I can have better control of this situation. In other situations, perhaps, because evolution is still underway in that organization and in the tech, it is perhaps best to onboard and learn from experts, often like Konverge. And as you are going through that education, you are farming up your skill sets, etc. And then you may consider hybrid models where you are both buying and building at the same time. By the way, it's a very prevalent conversation right now, even amongst our peers.
Yes.
And you will hear more and more of this on conferences.
Yes, very true. So I want to put a very different perspective to this discussion as well. So when you are applying AI to a domain, here the domain that we are discussing is construction. So there can be there are two kinds of softwares that if you have to bucket it out, you would encounter. So one are generalists ones where they allow you to build the pipelines based on your data and then you expose as part of the models. And there are certain which are somewhat point solutions, but they apply to your industry. So, for example, it can be safety at the construction site where you have a very specific solution, or be it a procurement side of things where you have applied AI with a very specific agentic procurement solution. So, when we are doing this build versus buy, does this point of the domain and the size of the organization also play a part in the selection?
Yeah, 100%. I think everything we spoke about right before this was about that, is understanding where you are in the maturity, what your size and complexity of the organization is. So 100% is actually one of the most crucial assessments in understanding whether you go with buy or build, right? The other is generally your vision of where do you think you will be in a few years, or whatever your strategy timeline is, right? And normally it's 3 to 5 years. And if that means that you are buying now to enable build later on and to find the right partner to build sometimes, if not in-house, then that's what you are actually catering it to.
Right.
Your question had the premise of use case selection. And that ties back to the very first point of what are the various avenues of losing revenues, losing margins, so to speak. And then where can you stop the lead? Or do you look at the best opportunity for efficiency, or then are you enriching?
Right. So now speaking about the maturity part that you talked about, where an organization is in that maturity curve. So you have seen organizations move from exploration to experimentation to transformation. And what stage do companies need to reimagine workflows instead of just layering AI on top, where you are just throwing these products or solutions at the stakeholders, asking them to just like start using them in their day-to-day life?
This is such a leading question, Ketan. And I know you know this, but you have to simplify before you automate, right? No doubt. And the enormous power of what we have on our hands right now with this technology is that it is making us reset our questions, as we were talking about, right? We are coming back to a drawing board, trying to ask first principle questions. And a great example with RFIs, right? When we first started getting responses to RFIs, our goal used to be, okay, my target is to have a 3-day turnover on RFI responses or submittals, right? And then how can I make sure that my 16-day or 10-day responses come back down to a particular turnaround time? But with AI, we are no longer asking these questions. We are not even asking, not only are the responses are on time or not only is that no longer a question, we would ideally want to see less RFIs completely, right? So eventually the goal is to eliminate questioning because the answers exist somewhere. And whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT or some other version of it, you have the database to explore, find the answer. So the collaborators find the answer before you go into these 3 days, 10-day delays of Q&A, right? So we are resetting what problem we are trying to solve. And because of that, it is enormously important to reimagine the process, question the process, and simplify before you automate. Otherwise, then you are baking in all the inefficiencies of the old processes and the old thinking.
Right. So my follow-up question on this is that so there is this scale of technology in general penetrating the construction space, or we call it as construction tech, versus the penetration of only AI solutions in the construction space. So, do you see that there is a significant divide between the two, or right now if you would say that they are almost at the same level?
So, I think they're merging. Both these pieces are sort of finding some sort of confluence in the point that even, let's say, 6 months to a year ago, we were still considering how can we improve some processes. And I know that we are going to perhaps switch on our tech stack to go to another tech, right? A solution. And in that solution, what is evolving or what is appearing now is that a lot of the automation or the agentic automation that we are trying to imbibe now exists in those solutions itself, right? In the next solution that we are finding, right? And I think that evolution has been fast enough where even as we would have started implementing some of that, we would have still met that same point of going live, right? And I think this is why this is an interesting point, and it's almost causing us to take a pause rather than move too quickly. So it's a very interesting time to actually reassess the tech stack and explore that do you have options for agentic solutions which actually give you the same output rather than considering an overall agentic sort of an enterprise-wide implementation for something. The only gap I see right now is that oftentimes these are platform-specific solutions with a sort of a hard wall in terms of how that data interacts with other data outside. And there is no process, just like life, there is no process that actually completes in a silo. Everybody works with somebody else, right?
True.
And as long as the go-to-market approach for these startups also understands that the product needs to have some openness to get data or have a data connection across platforms or across functions, then I think we will have a much more improved product and experience for the users themselves, right? As a subscriber, I would want that, right? But we are in a wait and watch mode where if you are now looking at improving or swapping tech stack entities, then this AR solution as a part of that table stakes expectation exists, right? And so, as I said, I feel like the Contech approach, if you're to separate it from the AI approach, is no longer separate.
No longer separate. Right. Right. Now, we always talk about causation and correlation, right? That analogy that we have. So, from a stakeholder's perspective, there is an experience part of it that you are trying to give to the stakeholder, and there is setting of expectation on some kind of improvement that is going to happen due to bringing an AI solution. So what are some of the thumb rules that you would keep in mind while you are designing an approach to a problem and you are talking to the stakeholders?
We've talked at length about just resetting the question, right, from the beginning. The one thing we are looking at is, like simple data and insight solutions, right, which at one point used to only provide dashboards and insights, right? Now we have to take them all the way through the life cycle of that process, right? So we want to take insight to decision-making and then decision-making to actually action. And our goal is to then provide that lifecycle solution in software, but then also connect it to the outcomes where somebody can actually take action. That becomes a big sort of a future state goal for us, that you would like to tie that approach from the genesis of an issue to providing information to acting on it.
Right. Right. And my follow-up question on that is that for most firms in a domain like construction, but I'm sure it's based on your experience as well, they start with business intelligence and some kind of performance management.
Yeah.
And then you want to move up looking to move up the value chain. So how can you rate whether AI adoption will be successful beyond dashboards and reports?
I think it ties to the core of this flow, right? This lifespan of action that I was referring to. Our goal is to actually affect outcomes, right? And dashboards, insights, while being valuable, are only at the front end of this process. And so our goal is to effectuate decision making eventually, right? And bring the outcomes to the fore. Oftentimes, even as you execute, you want to be live connected to some of the nuances that might change, right? Because as fast as the information cycle is, even on project sites now, sometimes the insight that you go with transforms or evolves by the time you're executing on that front. So there is this thought about the physical side of construction that we have to take into account. Are the people who are executing aware of all of the information and the insight, and which then has provided a particular decision making? Otherwise, you are just executing blind, right? Without understanding the causation of that decision, right? Of what led to that decision. What is also promising for me in the near future is how much of this approach is now moving from the software and platform side to the physical asset side, right? In terms of IoT and actually the physical installation of various things. Consider drywall or pulling electricals or something else. In fact, just I think last week, JLG acquired the Canvas robotic technology for drywall finishing, right? And so now it makes sense now that you see these acquisitions play out. But this is the next natural step, is to take everything that you're achieving on the platform and software side to the IoT and robotics side of implementation.
That's a great perspective that you have on the robotics side, which you mentioned, because when we talk about AI, most of the times the mindset of the software folks is that it's only a software based solution and there is no hardware part of it which is involved. And in a space like construction, the example that you gave of the drywall painting robot, which can autonomously go about it, or maybe you may have some other robotics applications in the future in construction as well. One of them can be, which it comes to my mind, is that I always get scared of the heights, and you see people not exactly in construction, but they work and they have to like install the glasses at the heights, right? So that's a very risky proposition. When you are constructing a building, you have to go to that height, and then from an outside you are installing a glass. So that is also something maybe in future we may see a robot actually going on that height and installing some kind of glass.
Certainly, I don't, it's not out of the question, because I already know there are startups that are dealing with cleaning of curtain glazing at an elevation, right? And that is being automated. I think to enable that kind of construction, which I think you have the right vision on this, construction may need to incorporate some pieces that then these robots or models can then reference in terms of their geolocation or their positioning, right? So it may change how we even look at things in terms of the components that are now used, right? So we used to look at 4x8s for drywall for installation because the joints and the damping would be minimized or optimized, right? But if a robot is doing it and you're not worried about the bending of your arm or the repetition of some of this work, then maybe you look at smaller pieces, more joints, but it may not matter in terms of the joints inefficiency, because the robotic efficiency actually finds enough outcome for you to make it attractive, right? So a lot of rethinking has to happen in terms of how the implementation occurs.
Right. But I can see that there is a lot of scope from an application point of view. So looking at your 2+ decades in consulting and construction transformation, what's one misconception leaders still have about AI's role in operational excellence?
It's wow. There's a few, but if I might give you two. One is that, and it has a lot to do with the maturity of the organization. I keep coming back to this, that if you're a small organization, obviously on the tech side, generally IT, under the umbrella of IT, everything happens under the umbrella of IT. But as you deal with more complex solutions, particularly when it comes to AI models, you see this bifurcation of technology. So there is IT as a group, technology as a group, which just looks at platforms, but then there is data and AI, which is another group, right? And I think depending on where you are in your maturity, you may have one, two, or all three of them, right? And to then think that IT handles data and AI models would be self-defeating for what your outcomes are. And I think some of this education needs to happen in terms of executive management. And that is part of the buying process, right? And that is part of our responsibility to educate our peers as well, right? And the industry. I want to make sure that I mention this, that we are learning at the same time because it's evolving so quickly. So while there is no set structure organizationally, there is certainly some fallacies in this old way of thinking of what might happen under IT, right? That no longer happens. The other, I believe, is the question of, are you ready for AI? First of all, this is a very, very generalized and broad statement, right? And there is no single answer for this. And use case selection has a lot to do with it, but the readiness of your data foundation has even more to do with it. And the reality is your data foundation may differ from function to function. Sometimes because of the inherent platform that actually gathers the data, is it pristine? Can you normalize it? Then can you use it for modeling and so on, right? And I think that's why this question needs to be tied to a use case. The use case needs to be selected on priority and various ROI decision making. And then you have to ask very topical questions. Are you ready for AI for this specific use case? Rather than thinking, are we ready for AI? And then tying it to a gut feel is something that is going to leave you behind.
Right. And I just want to add a follow-up question on this. Sure. Is that so as a leader in consulting and construction transformation, do you feel that this is a technology, the AI tech that we are encountering is a once in a lifetime, tech opportunity where right now the level playing field is same for everyone, and everyone is trying to understand the first, you talked about executive education, or, everyone is trying to understand first the tech side of things and then figuring out that what could be the eureka moments to apply?
It is certainly leveling it out. I'm not aware enough of the breadth of this industry to say, is it truly level? I think it certainly presents the opportunity to level. And a lot of this comes with self-education, but most of it comes with the experience of actually getting involved in the implementations. Because there are various pieces that people are not aware of. And on the user base, you get excited by the outcomes and how simply a workflow works. But 80 to 90% of the work that has happened in enabling it has happened before.
Right.
And there is configuration, there's training, there is, checking on drift, aligning it again. All of this has to happen before you can reliably deploy something. And I feel that needs to be understood. And if there are people who may be functionally inclined to get involved or who are individually interested, then I think it is great to actually understand that whole process. And then maybe you can see where you can get involved individually and maybe perhaps for your function, right? You don't how to be tech. I came from an operational background myself, right? I mean, I literally come from architecture to engineering PMO to construction, and tech just happened to be a gap that somebody had to pick up. And we find that there are a lot of operational leaders who could actually play their part in this case. And to that effect, I think there is a certain amount of leveling in terms of opportunity. Up till now, I would certainly say it's been low-side iterational opportunity. Certainly, it is questioning how my daughter is going to learn in the future, for example, right? I don't know, honestly, what that might look like. I don't know how the future of training will be. I don't know how the future of entry-level employment will be, which is so much in question at this moment. Right? So it has raised a lot of questions while it is offering this promise for leveling.
Right. And that's what's going to be my last question, is that someone, right now sitting in the university somewhere starting the career in construction or civil engineering or architecture, and being overwhelmed by all this thing which is happening around, what would be your top three, experience sharing or an advice to that person right now sitting and starting the career?
Top three. Even before I give that, the very first thing I will say is tie yourself to a domain, but let me give you an anecdote. About a year and a half ago or so, I was actually trying to onboard an analyst, right? Just a data analyst. And somehow within 6 days, we got more than 1,500 applications for that one position. And we had to just shut it down, right? And then I realized, even though I was looking for, let's say, 3 to 5 years experience, it was kind of all over the place in terms of applications. But we realized while tech was downsizing in the last few years, and these are some of the smartest entry-level folks, computer science, math, applied sciences, and somehow they're all in the marketplace because the tech promise no longer offers them that opportunity, or it's too crowded for the opportunities that exist there. And so now what exists is the domain space industry, right? So at this point, and my answer may change in the next few years, this is evolving,
yes,
right? But at this point, if you target yourself to a domain, that gives you the kind of leverage that just portable tech doesn't have in the wider scheme of opportunities, right? So if you can, in your early time, whether it's through internships, co-ops, whatever that may be, find industry opportunities also. Don't just look at tech, right? And I think that will give you a lot of scope because the opportunity exists across the board right now. Second would be just network. There is, I remember growing up, I have been an introvert. I had a hard time public speaking. I don't know at what point that has changed, but what did help me was the ability to ask good pointed questions to authority. And sometimes even when you're not reporting to it, right? And then these opportunities arise. All they need to know is you are capable and that you have raised your hand when that opportunity comes. So that becomes a huge part of it. And the third is, I would say, don't plan too far. Don't plan 10 years or 20 years. These career development exercises are just impossible. Yes. Not only look at the news cycle, extremely fast, right? I think the tech cycle, opportunity cycles are all pretty fast. My own career is a great example. I have actually, while I have stayed in the same vertical, but I have moved across the board, not by design, it's just by opportunity. So if you're looking at 3 to 5 years and your ability to reassess your opportunity at 3 to 5 years may be sufficient for just being nimble and adapting to what might come up in the industry in your life.
That's a great way to, I think, put it up. Thank you so much, Atul. I think this was a great discussion. So we started with resetting the game and how you have to have the mindset now to where the ideas of evolutionary to revolutionary. How do you go about picking up the right problem statements? Then how do you go about implementing them with a perspective? We also talked about vibe coding and your take on that, and then we went upon I think which was very important is not only you think about the software aspects of AI, but the robotics and other aspects from a construction domain point of view. And I think at the end, we talked about both the things. Be it you are a leader, how do you go about approaching this versus and someone who's starting in the domain, how do you go about your career? Thank you so much, Atul, for coming here on the podcast and sharing your views.
Ethan, I love the opportunity to talk. Again, thank you so much to you and Konverge for having me on board. And I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we continue this.
Yes,
Thank you.
surely. Thank you so much.
All right.